Imagine 28 men trapped in the most hostile place on Earth, their ship destroyed, surrounded by a frozen ocean stretching as far as the eye can see. The temperature plunges to 40 degrees below zero, and civilization is over 1,000 miles away across some of the most violent seas on the planet. This is the true story of Ernest Shackleton and the Endurance Expedition, a journey that became what many consider the greatest survival adventure ever recorded, and where, against all conceivable odds, all 28 men survived. But how did they get there? And how did they achieve the unthinkable? The year was 1914. The heroic age of Antarctic exploration was at its peak. The South Pole had been reached by Roald Amundsen in 1911, followed tragically by Robert Falcon Scott in 1912. But one last great prize remained: the complete crossing of the Antarctic continent, 2.5 million square miles of deadly ice, coast to coast. No one had ever attempted it. Ernest Shackleton was an obsessed man. At 40 years old, he had already proven his worth in Antarctica. He had come closer to the South Pole than any man before him in 1909, turning back just 97 miles from the goal, not out of fear, but wisdom. He chose to save his team instead of reaching glory. That decision would define who he was. Now, Shackleton had a new vision: the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, a grand name for an impossible ambition. The idea was simple and insane at the same time. 2 ships, 2 teams. One would cross from the Weddell Sea, the other from the Ross Sea. They would meet in the middle, in the frozen heart of the continent. 1,800 miles of crossing through absolute unknown. Shackleton was a magnetic leader, charismatic, determined. He recruited his crew with an advertisement that became legendary. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. 5,000 men applied. Shackleton chose 27. Scientists, sailors, artists, photographers, young and experienced men, each selected not just for their skills, but for their ability to endure extreme isolation. Shackleton had a keen instinct for character. He would need men who wouldn't break when the world froze around them. The ship was named Endurance. The name came from Shackleton's family motto: "By endurance we conquer." It was a 144-foot wooden bark, specially reinforced to navigate ice seas. The hull was over 2 feet thick, strong, resilient, or so everyone believed. In August 1914, while the Endurance was being prepared in London, the world changed. The First World War erupted in Europe. Shackleton immediately telegraphed the Admiralty, offering his ship, his crew, and his resources for the war effort. The response came in a single word: proceed. And so, on December 5, 1914, the Endurance departed from South Georgia Island, the last frontier of civilization before the White Void. On board, 28 men, 69 sled dogs, and hopes of making history. Shackleton was optimistic, but also cautious. He knew Antarctica, knew its deadly beauty, and as the Endurance sailed south toward the Weddell Sea, he watched the ice. The first signs were subtle: floating ice plates, majestic icebergs drifting like white cathedrals. Then the sea began to thicken. Pack ice appeared, at first navigable. The Endurance pushed forward, forcing through the frozen plates, its reinforced hull breaking the way. But on January 18, 1915, just 1 day's sail from the Antarctic coast, the unthinkable happened. The ice closed in, not gradually. Almost overnight, the Weddell Sea froze around the Endurance like a trap snapping shut. The ship was stuck. Shackleton ordered they try to break free, but it was useless. The ice was at least 6 feet thick, and it was growing. In that moment, Shackleton made his first critical decision. He gathered the crew and spoke with absolute calm. The crossing plan was canceled. The goal now was to survive the Antarctic winter and wait for the ice to break in spring. Then they would sail back home. Simple, direct. He left no room for panic. The men adapted. They transformed the Endurance into a floating home, hunted seals for fresh food, played soccer on the ice, held sled races with the dogs. The expedition's photographer Frank Hurley captured everything. There was an almost winter camp feeling, strange, surreal, as if they were on a controlled adventure. But the ice didn't care about optimism. It moved slowly, inexorably. Pack ice is a living entity, driven by ocean currents and winds. It compresses, expands, breaks, and reforms. And the Endurance was trapped in its deadly movement. Months passed. March, April, May. The Antarctic sun disappeared completely, plunging them into continuous darkness. Temperatures plummeted, -4 degrees Fahrenheit, -22, -40. Inside the ship, condensation froze on the walls. The men slept in their sleeping bags, blankets piled high, breath creating clouds of ice. And then they began to hear the sounds. Deep groans, sharp cracks. The ice around the Endurance was moving, compressing. In July, the pressure increased dramatically. Enormous ice blocks, some the size of houses, were pushed against each other by the moving pack ice, and the Endurance was between them. Shackleton knew what was coming. He had seen ships crushed before, but he said nothing to the crew. Not yet. There was no reason for premature alarm, but in October 1915, the inevitable began. The sound was indescribable, as if the Earth itself was screaming. Enormous ice plates pressed against the Endurance's hull. The wood groaned, creaked. The men could feel the ship trembling beneath their feet. You could hear the wooden beams beginning to split. Shackleton watched with deadly calm. He knew it was only a matter of time. On October 24th, the pressure became catastrophic. The ice lifted the Endurance's stern, tilting the ship at an impossible angle. Water began pouring in. Pumps were activated, but it was a losing battle. The ice was literally crushing the ship, opening cracks in the reinforced hull as if it were paper. Shackleton gave the order, abandon ship. Imagine the moment you're home for almost 10 months, your only protection against one of the most hostile environments on Earth, and you need to leave it behind and walk onto the ice. To where? To nowhere, just ice in every direction. The men worked frantically, removed supplies, food, tents, sleeping bags, lifeboats, navigation equipment. Every item had to be dragged across uneven ice. Frank Hurley even went back several times to rescue his photographic plates. Precious documentation of the expedition. Shackleton made him choose only the best. No extra weight. Every pound mattered now. And then, on November 21st, 1915, the Endurance died. The men watched from the ice camp 1,300 feet away. The ship that had carried them across thousands of miles of ocean was slowly devoured. The ice crushed the hull. The mast broke. The stern rose in the air like a wounded whale. And then, in a moment forever etched in their memories, the Endurance sank beneath the ice, disappeared into the black waters of the Weddell Sea. Absolute silence. 28 men, alone, on a drifting ice floe. The nearest land was hundreds of miles away, and they had no way to reach it. Shackleton gathered the men. His voice was firm, controlled. Ship and stores have gone, so now we'll go home. How? No one asked aloud, but everyone thought it. Shackleton's plan was seemingly simple. They would set up camp on the ice and drift with the pack ice. Eventually, he hoped the currents would carry them north, toward the islands around the Antarctic Peninsula. When they were close enough to open water, they would use the 3 lifeboats they had salvaged from the Endurance. They would sail to solid ground. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. They established Ocean Camp, 5 tents on the ice. A makeshift camp on a platform that moved constantly. The ice cracked beneath them, opened, closed. Sometimes they woke to crevasses forming yards from their tents. The days were a routine of survival. Hunt seals and penguins for food. Melt ice for water. Stay warm, stay sane. The Antarctic winter was returning. The darkness, the deadly cold, and the drift was painfully slow. Miles per week. Sometimes the currents took them in the wrong direction. South, deeper into Antarctica. Shackleton showed no frustration. He maintained a rigid routine, regular meals, organized work. He understood something fundamental about survival. You die when you lose hope. So he created structure, purpose, normalcy amid chaos. But the situation was desperate. They had food for maybe 3 months, if they rationed severely. They were in wet sleeping bags that froze at night. Clothes never dried. The cold penetrated to the bone. Men developed sores from constant cold. Some began showing signs of frostbite on their fingers. In December, Shackleton made a decision. They would try to march across the ice. They would drag the boats and supplies and walk to the nearest land. Pollitt Island, over 300 miles away. It was a disaster. The ice was impossible. Enormous blocks, pressure ridges 16 feet high, deep snow. They managed to move less than 1.5 miles in 3 days of exhausting work. The men were burning out, getting weak. Shackleton stopped the march. They returned to camp. They would wait for the drift again. Patience Camp. The name said it all. Months dragged on. January, February, March 1916. The food was running out. They killed some of the remaining sled dogs. An agonizing decision, but necessary. The men cried as they slaughtered animals that had become companions. The tension was palpable. Men who had been friends began fighting over small things. The cramped space, the constant cold, the uncertainty. Shackleton was always watching. He intervened in arguments before they escalated, moved men between tents when he sensed friction, kept everyone busy. And then, on April 9th, 1916, the ice finally began to break, not gradually, dramatically. Enormous chasms opened. Black water appeared between ice plates. The camp was literally fragmenting beneath them. They had to move several times in a matter of hours, jumping from one ice block to another as the pack ice disintegrated. On April 15th, Shackleton gave the order everyone had been waiting for and dreading. Launch the boats. The 3 lifeboats were dragged across the broken ice to the water. 28 men divided up. The James Caird, the largest, carried 11 men, including Shackleton. The Dudley Docker carried 9. The Stancomb Wills, the smallest, carried 8. The nearest island was Elephant Island, a desolate piece of rock 100 miles north. But between them and Salvation, the Weddell Sea, ice-cold waters, violent winds, 16-foot waves, and they had open wooden boats. No covers, no heating, no real protection. The journey began and immediately became a nightmare. Waves broke over the boats. Seawater froze instantly, coating the men and vessels with ice. They had to constantly break off accumulated ice, or the boats would sink from the weight. Their clothes were soaked. Wet sleeping bags were useless. There was no way to get warm. The men rowed hours, days. Their hands bled, froze to the oars. Thirst was worse than hunger. Surrounded by water, but they couldn't drink it. Seawater would kill them faster than dehydration. They had only rationed melted ice. 2 days passed. 3. Some men began hallucinating. Hypothermia was setting in. They had to stay awake. Sleep could mean never waking up. On the 3rd night, a storm hit. Giant waves. The sky disappeared. They were separated in the darkness. Shackleton shouted, trying to keep the boats together, but it was useless. Each boat fought alone against the ocean. How does anyone survive this? But they survived. When the sun rose on the morning of the 4th day, All 3 boats were still afloat, separated but alive. Gradually, they managed to reunite, and then, through the fog and sea spray, they saw it land. Elephant Island was a vision of frozen hell, sheer cliffs, stone beaches, ice and snow covering everything. But it was solid. After almost 5 months drifting on ice and 4 days in the tempestuous sea, the men collapsed on the rocky beach and kissed the ground. For the first time since the Endurance was crushed, they were on solid ground, but the reality was brutal. Elephant Island was uninhabited. No ship ever passed by. It was the middle of nowhere. They were safe from the sea, but still trapped, isolated, and food was practically gone. Shackleton knew what he had to do. He gathered the crew, spoke with that lethal calm that had become his trademark. Someone had to go for help. The nearest whaling station was at South Georgia, the island they had departed from almost a year and a half ago. 800 miles across the Southern Ocean, the most dangerous waters on the planet. In the James Caird, 22 feet long, open wooden boat. It was madness, but it was the only chance. Shackleton chose 5 men to accompany him. Frank Worsley, the navigator. They would need perfect celestial navigation or they'd be lost in the ocean. Tom Crean, loyal and strong. Timothy McCarthy, excellent sailor. John Vincent and Harry McNish, the carpenter who would reinforce the boat. 22 men would be left behind on Elephant Island under the command of Frank Wild Shackleton's seconds. There were no guarantees. If Shackleton failed, everyone would die. On April 24, 1916, the James Caird was launched into the sea. The Southern Ocean in autumn is possibly the most hostile place on Earth for navigation. Storms form in minutes. 50-foot waves are common. Wind reaches 100 miles per hour, and they were in a wooden boat with an improvised sail. The first days were chaotic. McNish had built a rudimentary cover with wood and canvas, transforming the James Caird into something partially enclosed. But water entered constantly. 2 men had to pump and bail water non-stop. Ice accumulated. They had to break it with axes. Inside the boat, there was no space to lie down. 6 men crammed together, wet, frozen. Every hour they changed positions, 2 navigating, 2 pumping, 2 resting. But rest was impossible. The constant movement, the freezing water, the penetrating cold. Worsley navigated with a sextant, trying to capture positions of the sun between storm clouds. An error of 1 degree and they would sail right past South Georgia, lost in the South Atlantic forever. The pressure was unimaginable. Food was scarce, soaked biscuits, dried seal meat, rationed water. Each man was entitled to a pint per day. Thirst was constant, torturous. And then, on the 5th day, came the storm, a wall of water and wind. The sky disappeared. The James Caird was thrown like a toy. Giant waves broke over them. The sail tore. They had to lower it and drift in the storm. For 36 hours, they fought just to keep the boat afloat. Shackleton didn't sleep. He was at the helm, holding the course, shouting encouragement above the roar of the wind. When a man started to give up, he was there, steady, unshakable. The storm passed. Miraculously, they were still alive, still sailing in the right direction, but they were exhausted. 1 week at sea, then 2. The men began hallucinating again. Vincent collapsed, unable to continue. They had to take turns caring for him while keeping the boat on course. Drinking water was running out. They began rationing even more severely. A few sips of melted ice per day. Cracked lips bled. Swollen throats made swallowing difficult. And then, on the 15th day, McCarthy shouted, "Land!" Through the fog, they saw the snow-capped peaks of South Georgia, but their nightmare wasn't over. The wind pushed them toward the wrong coast of the island, the uninhabited side. Enormous cliffs, violent seas breaking on the rocks, They tried to round the island, but another storm hit them. For 9 hours, they fought hurricane-force winds, trying not to be thrown against the cliffs. Finally, the next day, they managed to land in a small cove. They staggered ashore, 16 days at sea, 800 miles. In the James Caird, they had achieved the impossible, but there was still a problem. They were on the wrong side of the island. The whaling station at Stromness was on the other side, and between them and salvation, mountains 5,000 feet high, glaciers, terrain never before crossed, no climbing equipment. Shackleton, Worsley, and Crean rested for 3 days. Then they set out. McNish, McCarthy, and Vincent, 2 weak, would stay at the camp. On May 19, 1916, 3 men began to cross the interior of South Georgia. 36 hours. That's how long it took. 36 hours of non-stop climbing. No ropes, no map, no proper equipment. Just absolute determination. They climbed glaciers, descended impossible slopes at one point, deliberately sliding down a 1,500-foot ice ramp because it was the only way. Crossed mountain passes in total darkness. When they found a route blocked, they turned back and tried another. They were beyond exhaustion, beyond pain, moving on pure willpower. And then, on the morning of May 20th, they heard something they hadn't heard in over a year. A whistle, the whistle of a whaling factory. Civilization. They descended the last slope, entered Stromness. 3 ghostly figures, long beards, clothes in rags, faces marked by suffering. The whalers didn't recognize them, thought they were castaways. Shackleton identified himself, asked to speak with the station captain. When the captain came and recognized Shackleton, the man wept. "All the men safe?" he asked. "All alive. All well," Shackleton replied. But 22 men were still on Elephant Island, and 3 were on the other side of South Georgia. Shackleton didn't rest. The same day, he sent a ship to rescue McNish, McCarthy, and Vincent. They were recovered, all safe. But Elephant Island was more difficult. They tried 4 times to reach the island. Ice blocked each attempt. Different ships, different routes. Weeks passed, then months. On Elephant Island, Frank Wild kept the men alive, created a routine. Every day, he packed his belongings and said, "Roll up your gear, boys. The boss may come today." They believed. They had to believe. Finally, on August 30th, 1916, after 4 months and 5 days on the island, the Chilean ship, Yelcho, managed to break through the ice. Shackleton was aboard. When he saw the men on the beach, he asked Wild, "All well?" "All well, boss." 22 men, exactly as he had left them, all alive. 28 men entered Antarctica. 28 men came out. In an era when polar expeditions frequently resulted in death, Scott had lost his entire team to the pole. Shackleton didn't lose a single man. Impossible decisions made with absolute clarity. Maintaining morale when there was no reason for hope. Understanding that his only mission wasn't glory or discovery, but bringing everyone home. The expedition was a failure in its objectives. They never crossed Antarctica. The Endurance was lost, but it became something greater. A story of human resilience, of loyalty, of leadership amid absolute chaos. Shackleton returned to a world at war. His survival epic was overshadowed by the horrors of the trenches in Europe. He died in 1922 on another Antarctic expedition at 47. He is buried in South Georgia, the island that had been his salvation. But his legacy lives on. Business schools study his leadership. Books are written. Documentaries are made. Because Shackleton's story isn't just about survival. It's about what human beings are capable of when they refuse to give up. 28 men against Antarctica, against the ice, against the ocean, against impossibilities. And they won. They didn't conquer the continent, but they conquered something greater. They conquered through endurance, by endurance, and everyone came home.